Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Tribe. Welcome to SVA MFA Fine Arts Department's talk series. For this evening's talk, we're really thrilled to have Alexis Rockman, and to introduce him tonight, we have SVA's Director of Career Development, Angie Bojack.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am so pleased to introduce Alexis tonight. First, I'd like to say that he is a graduate of SVA, and we're very pleased about
barely.
that. Barely. And started his illustration, correct?
I started in illustration and switched to fine art in my junior year.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that later. Love that story. Alexis has exhibited extensively worldwide since 1985. He's been the subject of many international solo and group exhibitions, including a major retrospective at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. His work is also included in public and private collections around the world. His recent exhibitions include one of my favorites that I saw in Salem over the summer, which was Alexis Rockman Shipwrecks at the Peabody Essex Museum and at the Guildhall in East Hampton. Welcome, Alexis, and thank you for joining us.
All right, nice. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. It seems like a long time, 1985, but that's true. And I'm just going to go full screen here. I am in rural Connecticut, where I just moved my studio after spending my whole life in Manhattan. And so far, so good. Talk to me in February when there's 10 feet of snow and it gets dark at 2 in the afternoon. And it seems like The Shining. But so I am going to talk about, I made a special lecture for you children at SVA, even though I hear some of you are in your 50s. And I'm going to talk about my history in terms of my career and how I started, and show pictures. And the timing's really good because I just have been scanning a lot of images from my studio. When I had to move it, I set aside a bunch of images. So let's see the first slide. I love nature. I love movies. That's me in 1968. I'm 6, not far from here in New Jersey. I'm in rural Connecticut, holding an eastern box turtle. I especially love turtles. I'll be speaking about turtles at the Cornwall Library on November 6th. If anyone wants to tune into that, check it out. That'll be a completely different lecture. So as a kid, I loved movies, I loved nature, and I collected reptiles and amphibians, especially. Next picture. I also love dinosaurs, like every little boy, or most little boys. I was mesmerized by the paintings of Charles R. Knight, who I ended up collecting. He's the painter that painted all the dinosaurs at the Museum of Natural History that tell you what dinosaurs look like really through the 1980s, when it becomes clear that they're much more like birds and have colorful feathers and stuff like that. As much as I know that that's true, I really think Tyrannosaurus still looks like this. Next slide. That's my iguana Emerald, probably in 1974 or 3 in my room. My mother and father were very indulgent, and I had vivariums, 6 vivariums in my room, and cages and stuff. That's chicken wire. And we'd feed the 3 iguanas, lettuce and fruit and bananas and stuff like that every day. So that was part of my childhood, is being around these animals. Next slide. I love the Museum of Natural History and dioramas, and was very aware that people made them, but also very conscious of how enchanting and magical they were. And this is a diorama that was built in the 50s that I used to go look at when I was a little kid, and sort of peer over the leaf litter and see these giant arthropods. You have a millipede and a daddy longleg. Next picture. I loved it so much that I actually made a painting of it in 1990 based on some photographs that I took, and sort of reconfigured some of it. So where I'm coming from is really from these places: movies, Museum of Natural History, my love of nature, and going to places. And I've been lucky enough to be able to make work about that pretty much my whole life. I've never had a real job, thank God. I'm sure I would be fired. Anyway, next picture. Other things that I loved, as I talked about movies, is this is one of the animators working on the original King Kong climbing the Empire State Building in 1932, probably. Next slide. This is Ray Harryhausen, who, for those of you that know anything about stop motion animation, is the the prodigy that came through Willis O'Brien, who did the original King Kong. He did the Jason and the Argonauts movies. This is from 7 Voyages of Sinbad in 1957 when he was quite young. Next slide. Here's a picture of me in 1995 with Ray Harryhausen when he's in his late 70s. So I'm someone who, if I see someone I'm interested in, I make sure I go meet them before they die. So I really think that's important to do if you're an artist. You have no guarantees in your life, not that there's any guarantees for anyone, but you better be doing it because you love it. Next image. Other people I love is Phil Tippett, who worked on the original Star Wars trilogy. This is the great AT-AT sequence from Empire Strikes Back in 1980. He's animating these stop motion models. Next image. Here's a picture of Phil in my studio about 10 years ago. So I wrote him a letter, an email, and he wrote back to me and said, "Oh man, I love your work. I always show it to my studio to get inspiration about Starship Troopers or whatever I'm working on," because he did all those monsters and RoboCop and stuff. So I was thrilled because he's been a big inspiration to me also. Next image. So now I'm going to talk about my relationship to my first gallery that went for 20 years or 19 years, which is amazing. That's an invitation to the first group show, and you can see, is anyone familiar with any of those artists? I'm sure you know who well, actually, maybe not a lot of them are that well known. Who knows? They were big in the 90s. Haim, I think, is very well known. They're all interesting artists, and I was thrilled because I was the only painter in this group. And David Story was kind of a painter, but he's a modernist. So I was really fascinated and wanted to be in like a gallery that had conceptual artists. And I was like, I wanted to be the only painter. Next image. And at this point, to be clear, 1986, I'm 24 years old. This is one of my shows at Jay Gorney when he moves to Soho. Go back one slide, please. You can see that this is on East 10th Street, which is in the East Village. It was a tiny little, like, now it's a veterinarian office, that space, if you can believe it. It was a dry cleaner after that. It's one of these, tenement space, ground floor tenement spaces. And Jay is a great dealer, and I'm still friends with him. And he had one of the greatest galleries, I think, certainly in the 80s and the 90s. Next image. Next image. I think that the last one was from 1988. This is from 1989 or 90. And you can see how the natural history stuff is coming into it. That's a desiccated morpho butterfly that's being disassembled by ants. I'm fascinated by not only the history of natural history, but our perception of nature and how we tell stories about ourselves and how we leave out parts of the story that makes us uncomfortable in terms of extinction and the biodiversity crisis and, of course, climate change. Next image. I was lucky enough to be a young painter. This is, I guess, in 1987, and I'm 25 years old on the cover of one of the major art magazines of the era, which is now defunct, Arts Magazine. Next image. It's good that you have to have doses of encouragement. You're going to be slammed down most of the time, but you have to have the confidence to get through those and you have islands of encouragement that you swim to that can get you through the dark times. This is a slightly different body of work, Biosphere. This is from 1993 at J Space and Soho. Science fiction-y based on Doug Trumbull's Silent Running movie. So I'm going to show you pictures of me in the studio from 1987 to 2020. The space I'm in is my second studio ever. The first one was on 85 Franklin Street, where I've done 90% of my career. Next image. That's me working on my first very large painting. And I have a question I know in the back of my head. Did you always make very large paintings? No. I was lucky enough to be working on a painting when a dealer named Genenzo Speroni of Speroni Westwater came to my studio and he said, "I love this, but it should be the size of this wall." So the painting I'm working on is 24 feet. And I actually have a painting in my studio right here that you can't see that's also 24 feet, exactly the same dimensions. And he said, I will buy it up front. I believe in you. Make the painting and we will show it at our gallery, which was one of the greatest galleries around in the early 90s. Mario Mertz, Gerhard Richter, Susan Rothenberg, and so on showed there. I was thrilled. I was 29. Next image. That's me working on something a little more, it's not really painting, it's an assemblage from 1997. It's a self-portrait dead in the jungle, and you can see that there's like digitized photography and sculpture and all sorts of stuff like that. If you're interested in that stuff, you can go on my website, it's under dioramas. Next image. That's actually back 5 years. This is me working on Evolution, the one that was on the floor 2 slides ago, as it was pretty much done, I think. I think that's kind of a posed picture of like, hey, I'm gonna pretend I'm working on the painting. Next image. Same painting, that's much less further along. You can see, you know, I'm in my studio, I'm on a ladder, I smoke cigarettes like crazy. On the lower left, you can see the ashtray. And I used to smoke 2.5 packs a day for 16 years. Luckily, I quit like 22 years ago. Next image. There's the finished painting. Here's me, 2010, 12 years later, that's Manifest Destiny, that's now in the Smithsonian, being broken apart as it was headed to the Brooklyn Museum. Next image. That's me a couple of years later with a bunch of smaller works. I'm going to show you a couple of them in slides. And that work's just getting ready to go out to various galleries. At the time, I think it was Leo Koenig and Baldwin Gallery in Aspen. We're splitting that show, and they did a nice book. Next image. That's me in 2013 working on my Bronx Zoo painting that I showed at Spurney Westwater. Next image. And this is the space that's behind me a year ago before it was renovated. And I mean, I could dunk on that finally. The basket in my, even though it was like 7 feet off the ground, but last winter we moved back to the city and renovated pretty much the whole house that I'm living in here, including the studio. And you can see that there's sheetrock and lights and stuff in this space. Next image. That's me working on a painting a couple of months ago in this space. Next image. And here's pretty much over my shoulder about a month ago. Next image. So now I'm going to talk about friendships and relationships. And, you know, no artists are alone in a vacuum. And if you are, it's pretty miserable. I was lucky enough to meet Mark Dion, who is actually an SVA alum as well. And he's a wonderful sculptor. And Bob Green, who didn't go to SVA, is a great photographer. In the late 80s, I actually didn't know him when I was at SVA. I kept hearing about him, but I was so proud and obnoxious. I didn't think anyone could be interested in natural history stuff as much as me, and I was skeptical. But then when I met him, I was like, oh my God, we have so many common interests, and we've been rooting for each other's careers ever since. And we're about to do a survey show of 35 years of our work as a 2-person survey show. It's going to tour and starting in about 2 years. Next image. There's me and Mark in 1988 in Belize. We were headed off to this little island to go diving, and a storm came in and we couldn't get to the island. So we spent a lot of time drinking and smoking. Well, he didn't smoke, but drinking a lot of rum and beer, waiting. Next. There we are playing with a hermit crab. The love of nature. Good. So here's Mark and Bob and I working on a collaboration, which was part of our project Concrete Jungle, which is examining plants and animals that flourish in spite of our best efforts to eradicate them, like pigeons and rats and eels and well, lampreys and cockroaches and that mosquito that I was actually missed it, I'm embarrassed to say. All these things that make a living off of us. And that's a painting of mine and some taxidermy and like a diorama type space. And then Bob is art directing it and photographing it. Next image. There we are moving things around. That's a taxidermy gull and some garbage and stuff. Next image. And here's the installation of our first version of this show in 1990 at Wesleyan University. It could be 91. Next image. There's Bob's photographs on the left, Mark's diorama at the back with the trash cans and the taxidermy and stuff. And then my painting on the far wall, that vertical thing, which is like a concrete jungle tree of life. Next image. And here's the second photograph that we made using taxidermy in my painting, which you can see out the window of a detail. Next image. Here's the couple of the paintings that I made during the early 90s to go along with that show. And we did a version of it in Germany and I think the Netherlands and as I said, Wesleyan, and I think, American Fine Arts, Colin DeLand, the great dealer that is unfortunately deceased. Next image. And there's the book that Mark and I edited about these issues. And it's an anthology with scientists, diorama fabricators, philosophers, anthropologists, so on and so forth. So if you're interested in this stuff in the real world, because we felt like we're artists and we make art, but there's so many other ways to be interested in stuff, and why not edit a book? We got paid $80 each of us, Mark and I, which when we finally got our check of 3 years of work, it was really a high paying gig. We went out to the Odeon and ended up not even be able to pay for dinner. So you got to do it for love. Next image. Then we went to Guyana, which is a country in South America. It's an ex-English colony, which is part of the Amazon basin in some level. It's, even though it's not really connected to the Amazon, it's connected to the Essequibo River. So we went camping in the jungle, and I mean jungle. There, we took a boat up the river and made this camp and made art there for 6 weeks. That was really a fascinating moment because at this point, I'm relatively successful. It's 1994. I've been in the Venice Biennale and had 30, 20 shows or whatever. And I'm like, I need to go and like see what people that were interested in the same stuff I'm interested in, and have this be a part of my life and not just received images like from a screen or from printed matter. So this is me drawing a catfish that was rotting and insects were eating it and stuff like that. So sort of treating it as an expedition. Next image. I ended up making a painting of the three of us. I'm on the far left, that's Bob with the net, and Mark holding the other net up at the top. And this is the idea of discovering a species for the first time, and you're sort of in a window into civilization, and these animals that haven't been named by science are in this other world. Next image. And there's Mark and me about 5 years ago at the Museum of Natural History with a bunch of the students from Columbia. So we're still really close. So Second Nature was my first survey show that happened right after we got back from Guyana. And that was obviously big. It was a great feeling to have, a survey show, which is basically you're still alive and you get a retrospective. And that traveled to, I think, 5 different museums: the Portland Museum, the Tweed, Cranbrook, and so on. It came out of university galleries in Normal, Illinois. Barry Blinderman was the curator. He was a great guy. I haven't seen him in years. Anyway, so this is 1995. And here's that science fiction painting again, the Biosphere Laboratory. There's about 30 paintings. Did a nice little catalog. Next. More installation. Next image. So it's the mid 90s and I'm in, I think, Duluth, Minnesota, where the show went. And I asked one of my favorite writers, who's a paleontologist, to come and speak with me because I'm very much interested in education about the history of science. And we're leaving, we're headed towards the airport. And I said, so what are you scared of in the future? And he said, oh, climate change, that's gonna be a big problem. It's 1995. And I'm thinking, yeah, just stay on this slide. He told me what it was. And I'm like, oh no, this is gonna be really a tough one because humans are really loath to make any sacrifices for things that they can't see. And I thought, well, I'm gonna try to make paintings about this to bring it to people's attention. And humans are visual creatures, and perhaps that could do something. So I spent off and on. It wasn't the only thing I was doing. I mean, it's either at this period it was either the biodiversity crisis, extinction, and climate change. Probably from 1995 till about 2006. That's what I was focused on exclusively. Next image. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me talk about this one. Go back one. So the first painting I did was Central Park, which imagined there were 2 scenarios: a snowball Earth scenario, and then, of course, the more typical, it's getting hotter, and the world's heating up, and the the ice caps melt, things migrate north, and you get tremendous extinction, and certain species do well and others don't. So, so this is, I believe, from 1996 or so. Next image. This is, even though this is about 7 years later, during that time, I was making works on paper and other paintings that I'll get to in the next couple of minutes. This is obviously Mount Rushmore with an invasive fish, the snakehead, Disney World. So I'm thinking about this as like postcards from different like iconic parts of America. Next image. Capitol building. Now this, of course, for those of you that seen Logan's Run, that, let's say, mixed bag science fiction movie from the mid-70s, there's some beautiful matte paintings by Matthew Urisic. And as I mentioned earlier, I love the history of movies, and I always thought that someone should make me a painting using that as a reference, some of those matte paintings. Gateway Arch in St. Louis with kudzu in front of it. There's a tiny little mosquito at the lower left, just below the horizon. You probably can't see it unless you're on the giant screen. This was before Instagram, and you realize that if it doesn't look good on the phone, you better not do it. Almost kidding. Next in, this is obviously Hollywood at night. Dorothy Spears, that's my wife who just walked in because she was hiking up a mountain with a friend of hers. I can't do any stuff like that because I just had shoulder replacement surgery here. Look at that. If I fall, it'll be catastrophic. Almost 3 weeks ago. So I have another couple of weeks of taking it easy, which I'm not really good at. Anyway, Dorothy and I met, and this is not a lynching of a kangaroo. It's actually a Bennett's wallaby that was killed by a car in Tasmania, and we're about to go stake it out in the ground to see if Tasmanian devils will come and eat it. So the first time we went on a trip, in a lot of ways, Dorothy, who's now my wife, we met, and we were together, and we decided we wanted to travel a lot. I haven't really traveled with Mark and Bob since then, and I don't know if I could take that type of travel anymore. I'm not tough enough, and I'm much older. But Dorothy who's much tougher than me, hence her climbing the mountain. Regardless, I don't even know if I would want to go on that hike if I were, given the green light. We went to Tasmania and spent about 6 weeks going around looking at various sites, and there ended up being a book that was published by Random House that I made a bunch of field drawings for, using organic material from there of the wildlife. So this is our first stop in 2003 in the northeast peninsula that's facing the Bass Strait. Anyway, next image. Here's Dorothy and I in 2006 at the Cincinnati Zoo, where I was doing a show at one of the museums, and I also am friends with the director of the Cincinnati Zoo, and we did a tour of their, behind the scenes sort of thing. That's an American alligator. It's awfully cute. Next image. Here we are, and a year later, headed to Antarctica, and that's where the tip of South America in Ushuaia. And I'm lucky enough to be invited by people like Sven Lindblad, who does Lindblad expeditions, to go to places. We just went to the Galapagos to see these incredible places, and all I have to do is give a lecture on the ship, and which is an incredible opportunity. Next image. Here we are in Madagascar. That's in 2009. About to climb this mountain, which is really rough, to go see the lemurs. Next image. It's like 900 degrees. If you have a big enough screen, you can see the silky sifaka, which is that white lemur in the middle of those two most vertical trees right above Dorothy's safari hat. So if you go straight up, about 2/3 of the screen up, you can see it sort of sitting there with a black face. Next image. There's me with I can't remember the name of that genus, this incredibly small, beautiful old world chameleon that were everywhere. It's just incredible. Next image. Here we are. So what I'm trying to show you is you can bring your life into your work if you're lucky enough and imaginative enough. This is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where Site Santa Fe asked me to do a sort of portrait of the landscape using whatever I wanted, and I made 75 drawings out of soil and fossils dirt and all sorts of debris and leaves and stuff of the history of New Mexico, including the fossil record. Next image. There we are in the Galapagos right before COVID hit. It's friggin' hot as hell. And again, this was a Lindblad trip, and we were lucky enough to be invited to go on the ship. It was great. Next. I love that. That's me and Dorothy's on the left, and we're snorkeling. And then this marine iguana climbs on one of the Zodiacs, and there was a photographer there who very generously gave me the shot because I love marine iguanas. I remember the iguana that I had in my room as a kid. Just seeing them swim right in front of me was just incredible. There's a Galapagos tortoise. Yes, Brookesia, you are correct. I'm going to talk about a sort of a slightly different type of project. I was asked by Creative Time in 1999 to do a commission imagining the future of future genetic engineering on something. And I thought, I think a farm is a great opportunity for that. So I made this painting. Next image. There's me working on it called The Farm, which I finished in 2000 and became a billboard. Next image. On Lafayette Street in Houston. And it was like a public art project. And it was also commissioned by a private collector. So it ended up in their collection. And I worked on this for about a year, imagining, I think the next image, if you could go to that. Yeah, there's a decent file of it. Imagine the future of agriculture and farming using artificial selection as a springboard. You know, plants and animals came from some part of the world, right? Chickens come from Southeast Asia. I think pigs also come from China originally. And I also think cows come from the Middle East. So someone took this genetic stock of these wild animals and created what we now know to be the backbone of our food industries. And then my job was to imagine what that might look like in the future. And I worked with Rob DeSalle at the Museum of Natural History as a molecular biologist. It was great fun. Next image. It became part of this other project 4 years later in London at the Camden Art Center. There's me on the subway platform in London. And I ended up making 4 other paintings relating to genetic engineering. Next image. And there's 2 of the other paintings. You can see the farm on the left. And that's one of the installation shots. Go back, please. Of the Camden Art Center, which is a great museum in London. Okay, so fast forward 6 years later, and to be clear, I think life has ups and downs. It's not like this parade of museum shows and wonderful trips. There's a lot of moments in the studio where you're figuring out the grind of being a professional artist is you don't do it when you feel like it. You do it every day. And some days are going to be better than others. And you just try to bring meaning to your life and your career in the studio every day, no matter what, because work doesn't make itself. And there are going to be days that are totally exciting and days that are kind of miserable and disappointing. So just to be clear, A Fable for Tomorrow was my next survey show / retrospective, whatever you want to call it. It started out at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And Joanna Marsh curated it, and then it went to the Wexner Center in 2010 and 11. And I mean, it was a tremendous honor to be in the Smithsonian. There's many reasons. So much of my work, and to be clear, I'm very critical of American history, but also love American history, and I love American iconography. And I'm fascinated by how America makes stories about itself, both in terms of literature, movies, and art, and any number of other things like computer games, like Red Rock West, for instance. How America mythologizes itself, and I try to embrace some of those ideas, and I'm critical of them, and very much enamored by them simultaneously. Next image. This is me in front of Manifest Destiny that I showed you disassembled in my studio 6 years later. This is actually fast forward a couple of years when the Smithsonian bought this painting from me and installed it, and now it's installed Nothing's permanently, but I'll show you a picture of that with a Thomas Moran, which actually was a big inspiration for Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was a painting that I made and started in 1999, trying to imagine what climate change was going to do to New York City in the future. And I consulted with James Hansen, who was then at the Goddard Center, and Cynthia Rosenzweig from Columbia. Tried to inform it with as much ecological information as I could. Next image. That's a little foam core model of the show in my studio, and where we're playing around with how to hang things. This is one of my favorite things is, when you're committed to doing a show, they send you a kit of the space and then like little postage stamp versions of the work to scale so you can hang it. Next image. That's the first thing you see when you walk in. That's a painting I made in 1986 of a mud skipper and how it sees, called What the Fish Sees. Next image. There's the opening of the show, and I'm speaking to whoever's, I can't remember who is behind me, and my family definitely, and various other supporters. Next image. And there's the show at I believe that's at the Wexner Center the next year before the Smithsonian bought that painting. Next image. More installation shots. Next image. There you can see evolution on the right from 1992 and various other paintings. That painting that was at Jay Gorney, where under the cursor, the butterfly is there. So it's great to come back and see these paintings that you might not see for 10 or 15 years or more, 20. It's really gratifying. Next image. This is the Smithsonian now. This is Manifest Destiny installed with Thomas Moran's Yosemite painting that actually used as an inspiration for Manifest Destiny in 1999. So this is a huge thrill. I couldn't be happier with this, and I had nothing to do with it. I just got someone sent me an email saying, "Oh, we just did this thing," and then the Washington Post wrote an incredible review or essay about this and how this painting takes the mantle of the 19th century and updates it. So dreams come true sometimes. Next image. Being on the cover of Art in America. Another great thing about these shows is that you might be hiding in a cave for 2 years or 3 years, and then if you have a big show, suddenly the media is interested in you and you have opportunities. That painting on the cover of Art in America was a painting I made after I got back from Antarctica and learned about those penguins and how much they're in trouble because of ice loss from climate change. Next image. I'm just going to show you a couple of places that when we could go to places and speak publicly, these are some places that I spoke. Next image. That is the Maui Art Center and Cultural Center in Hawaii. And there I have an image of places that I've done field drawings. Those drawings about using materials from the place. Here's from the Whitney, where I was speaking about Grant Wood a couple of years ago and talking about my perception of certain parts of his work and how I relate to it. Next image. There's me at the Penny Stamps in Michigan State. Great, beautiful theater, big thrill. I remember Oliver Stone was speaking next. There's me at the Metropolitan Museum talking about Martin Johnson Heat, which is on their website or YouTube, whatever. Anderson Ranch a couple of months ago in Aspen with Helen Molesworth, the great curator, who I've been friends with since the 80s. Prospect 2, I'm going to show you a couple of other shows. Battle Royale, which is a commission that's now at the New Orleans Museum of Art, that was originally shown in Prospect 2, which is the International Biennial that Dan Cameron curated, then the great curator who I was so thrilled to be asked by Dan to do something for the show, because I'm fascinated by Louisiana and Florida are really the gateways to America, because there's a battle going on, next image, between animals that live here and animals that are being introduced because of the pet trade or agricultural luck or whatever fell off a crate. So if you're looking at, obviously, if you have domestic feral cats, then they are a disaster for any wildlife. Xenopus, snakehead, reticulated python, all these things from other parts of the world come into these ecosystems and start to exploit the shit out of them. European wild boar, there's goats, fire ants, the list is endless, could go on and on. Fruit fly, Drosophila. Anyway, next image. And there it is at the museum with some kid I don't know pointing, and that's really gratifying to see kids. I don't know what the little girl, I assume, is saying, like, oh, look at that jaguar playing with the python. Maybe not. Next image. One of the more recent projects I did was with Dana Fries Hansen, who is a curator, who's a lovely guy who I've known since the 80s, who I've worked with off and on in Houston. He just became the Grand Rapids Art Museum CEO and head curator, and he asked me to do a project. I said, well, let's do something about the Great Lakes. Next image. So there's me and Dana. I think we're out in Chicago, outside of the Chicago Cultural Center. So started in Grand Rapids, went to Cleveland MoCA, Chicago Cultural Center, the Wiseman, the Haggerty, and the Flint Museum. So it had a great run. Next image. Next image. 5 major paintings, big paintings about different issues that the lakes have had to deal with in terms of human activity. Next image. There's me in front of Forces of Change in Cleveland. There's some of the works on paper. I ended up doing 6 works on paper, also watercolors. Next image. Then I was lucky enough to be approached by Ang Lee to work on Life of Pi, and he asked me to design or give him an idea of what the movie should look like. So I was lucky enough to be inspirational artist, and I worked on that off and on for 4 years. There's me, Ang on the left, Susan McLeod, who's the visual effects producer, and Tim Squires, who's the editor, in front of a picture of a visual effects shot that was based on one of my watercolors, which is a big thrill. Next image. Here's some of the stuff I did to get the movie off the ground that Ang asked me to make to convince 20th Century Fox to give him $120 million. Next image. Next image. Next image. And then I was lucky enough to, there was a big hole in the script called Tiger Vision. And one of the producers, Jean Castelli, who's a close friend of ours, and Ang said, well, what should this be? And I said, well, what do you think's going on? He's like, well, Pi and the tiger are they're so tired and they're so hungry, they go to the bottom of the ocean. What happens? So I thought, oh, there's a great opportunity. So if you ever saw the movie, it's the scene where you go to the bottom of the ocean and you see all these very rich symbolic moments from the history of their journey together, sort of brought to life in this undersea context. It was a big thrill to see it finished. Next image. Next image. Next image. Excuse me. Next image. This actually didn't make it into the movie because well, it's a long story, but I had this idea that you go into the mouth of one of the fishes and you see the universe, and it gets more and more into the size of the plankton, and then you go into this this Indian symbol that you see earlier in the movie, and it becomes, next image, Pi's mother. Next image. And then you see the sunken ship that they survived the shipwreck on. Next image. I think that could be it. And we have Spencer's lovely face.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really enjoy hearing you talk about your work, and just appreciate your generosity, and you were able to speak so candidly about your work. I could ask various kinds of smart questions, but I think I'm just going to ask you, what I'm genuinely most curious about is your process of making paintings. You talked about that one painting about the genetically engineered animals on the farm is taking a year. I imagine a lot of your paintings take a long time to make.
Yeah. The one I'm working at here, let me move my camera, see this? That's the blank canvas or panel. See? That's the same size as Evolution and Manifest Destiny, and that's going to be for the Mystic Seaport Museum. I've been off and on for months, reading, thinking, gathering images. Yep.
And so once you start putting, brush to canvas, what's the timeline?
Well, it's due January 1st of 23. So I'm really good about deadlines because I'm pretty OCD. So that's the timeline. And
I guess, can you talk a little about, would you rather not talk about your process of painting?
Oh, what do you want to know?
Okay, so
I'm like, all right, there's going to be a water line, and I'm going to take the collection of some of their vessels, and I'm going to decide what they are and ask them to photograph them from a certain angle. And then I'm going to decide which boat is just exploiting what resource in the ocean. And I'm going to sort of connect it to life in the ocean and the history of that boat. And there'll probably be like 15 of those. And then along the rest of the painting will be obviously whaling, fishing, deep sea mining, all sorts of stuff. Horrible things.
Do you sketch on paper and then work from sketches? You work right on the canvas?
No, I work in the computer. I plan things in a rectangle. I sort of have bulletin boards. It's like it's like basically big Post-its of images that I start to organize the space. And if I do a drawing, I'll do like a very schematic thumbnail with an arrow or something like that.
Okay. So you start out at SVA in illustration.
I started out at RISD.
Okay.
Went there in animation, freshman foundation, studied animation for a semester, came back to New York, took a semester off, went to SVA in illustration, thinking I didn't know anything about art. And about halfway through my first year, I was lucky enough to have some really smart teachers, Lorraine O'Grady and Lisa Liebman, and Lorraine said to me, Alexis, I don't really see you being an illustrator. You're not very obedient. You're not, which is ironic because I love working with Ang and I love working as a team. But I think what she was, I also knew they were really smart and talented. So they're generally right every time that I was talking to them when I was working on Life of Pi. I think it would be hard to live that life as an illustrator and deal with stupid art directors, which I'm not saying they're stupid, but chances are someone's stupid if you do it for a living. So she said, take a chance. Why not try to be an artist? And I was encouraged, and the East Village was happening, and I knew Kenny Scharf and Keith Haring had gone to SVA. And I'm like, why the hell not? What else do I have to do with my life? And I was very driven. I didn't have family money. A couple of times my parents covered the rent when I was desperate. But I was lucky enough I was Ross Bleckner's studio assistant for 6 months. And I sort of learned how a studio worked. And I was lucky enough to meet, incredible artists during that period, Julian Schnabel and Barbara Kruger. And they were always through his studio, and it sort of just made everything possible. Just watch it, dealers, stuff. I saw how the sausage got made, and I thought could be great.
I see you as kind of an outlier, not in the sense that Malcolm Gladwell talks about him, but well, it's just that, you're not a conformist at all. You've made this amazing, work over these decades, but to me, your work is conceptually related to so many other artists, but it looks really unique. And it has something to do, I think, with your background in illustration, that you don't shy away from that.
Well, I felt that, as it's 1985 or 4, and you're like, what's taboo? Well, looking at Dutch still life, or, dinosaur paintings, or Bierstadt, or, church. And I thought, these are all disgraced genres. And, so many people would just, roll their eyes or frown or laugh. And I thought, fuck you. I'm going to make paintings that are, if you can embrace things that are ignored or, unlovable, and try to make those matter, because there's so much rich tradition of I knew the biodiversity crisis was happening. And it's like, these are paintings of pristine nature, which is a bunch of bullshit, right? Why not make paintings about ideas, about what was really going on, that could deal with like an idea about being an activist? I was very involved. I knew Greg Bordowitz, and he was very involved in ACT UP. And I was like, well, why can't I do that with nature? Make paintings that make people nervous or uncomfortable, and like, we're killing everything. And, we don't even know what's going on 99% of the time. And, our culture is about looking the other way. And I was like scared, furious, and sad, all in equal doses. And, if you can't do what you love to do and you're an artist, you might as well get a real job.
That's for sure. So heads up to my students. I'm going to ask one more question, and then when Alexis is done answering that, I'm going to ask you guys for questions. So my last question, has your work ever been critiqued in a way that really got under your skin or stung, or that really stays with you? And how would you respond to that?
Well, there was a review of a show that I actually showed an image of, the Biosphere show that David Rimonelli wrote, who is brilliant. And I read it and I was really upset because I knew he was right. And he basically said I wasn't imaginative enough. And I really was like, I wanted to redo the show with him in mind. And I was lucky enough to ask him to write an essay for my upcoming Works on Paper survey monograph. That's product placement, book signing at Dashwood Books, November 10th. Be there or else. I'm gonna fucking come and get you. Through the computer. David and Helen Molesworth both wrote incredible essays about my works on paper. And I was so thrilled because, part of, you get reviews, and I don't recall, I've had a couple of stupid reviews that I thought were, they were definitely negative, but I was like, you're a friggin' idiot, who cares? It's when people are right that you really, so David really comes to mind for that. I'm sure there were others, but I can't think. I must have, blocked them out somehow.
Okay, so students, 2 ways to ask questions. One is to write them into the chat, and the other is to just raise your hand using the raise hand function, and I will call on you.
I have a question that relates to what you were asking earlier, Mark. So we're seeing like a lot of the work by Alexis are very large scale, hyper realistic, and I'm pretty sure it takes a hell long time to make. And I'm just wondering if you have any studio assistants that are helping you with the process, and if you do they get credits for the work?
I have no one. I have no one who works for me now. I've had people that were very helpful that absolutely would get credit, but I haven't worked with them since 2003. So, people come and go, and I love collaborating, and my wife definitely helps me. No one touches the work but me. But I definitely ask questions to get second ideas, second opinions, and my wife is really good formally, and I'm happy to. If you look at my books, I've had 32 books. Everyone gets as much credit. I'll be the first to give anyone credit that earned it, and I'm happy to.
That's unusual. Artists almost never credit their assistants. It's a different convention.
That's ungenerous.
It is, yeah.
If you're not going to credit your assistant, what's the friggin' point?
To take all the credit for yourself, yeah.
Then you're a freaking loser.
You heard it here. M, you have your hand up?
Hi, thank you, Alexis, for the amazing talk. I just wanted to start by saying that your Art in America cover, growing like kind of, I know it was kind of not super recent, but that was like one of the covers, because my mom got Art in America, and that one like stuck with me. I absolutely loved the painting Adelaide's, and of all the Art in Americas we always had stacked up on our like coffee tables and our like dining room tables, like that one was one of my all-time favorites. So like to be able to be here and hear you talk has been like a big deal for me. And like, I just wanted to say,
thank you.
yeah, it's really great because something about that was like one of those moments when I was like, well, for one, the solemn penguin that I was all the way to, you know, the stage right, was like, it resonated with me as like being a kid growing up. So like I had like a personal bias to it, you know, like feeling kind of like an outsider, but then it also felt like the current climate issue also was like a topic that was just being disregarded, you know? So I just really appreciate your vision and the way you explain that visual language. And I guess that's kind of where my question is that what personal methods do you have that inspire your like visual narrative? Like, I know that you take like, you're very almost like pragmatic about it, like realistic, like these are actually invasive species, but you know, like what are other things that inspire you to create these like these compositions and to develop a narrative? I mean, I'm just curious because I like climate art, but I don't know how to do it yet, you know, in a weird way.
I mean, I don't really, I kind of get a general idea of what I want to see, and then it's like it's a word and it's a picture and it's a word, and they sort of come together, and then I try to go sort of build that out using reference, which could be anything from, you know, some 19th century engraving to a film. I'm very democratic. Anything is inspiring. You know, an exterminator truck, I've been inspired by. Fish delivery. Walking down the street in 7th Avenue, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea for a painting. So it could be anywhere. Anything.
We have
and that like submersion in water, that like 2-point perspective that you have, like the underwater scene and the above water scene that you use pretty often, and I've seen it recycled a million times. Like since, you know, it started, where did you get the inspiration for that?
I had a fish tank in my room as a kid with turtles. You can see above and below.
I remember going to the pool and sitting there, like trying to find the point myself, like in the water. You know?
Wanting to see both at the same time.
Yeah.
Diorama,
well, thank you.
The aquarium, whatever. It's everywhere.
So we have a question in the chat from, and I'm going to go ahead and read it aloud. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Looking at your work, I felt that I was finding abstract parts of nature. Also, when looking at your paintings, most of them are divided into half of the screen. It reminds me of Mark Rothko and Peter Doig. Your painting is totally conceptual, but I see an abstract part of nature. I wonder which abstract artists influenced you, and at the same time, I wonder if you get an abstract sense from nature. So
thank you, Mark.
Yeah, so is using this term abstract, I think, in a pretty broad way, so you can.
I don't distinguish between abstract art or represent. It's like I use stuff where I think it's needed. And for instance, I love Morris Lewis. I mean, there's so many great abstract painters that I love, even Ellsworth Kelly. So it's all, there's so many things that are inspiring. I don't particularly like Rothko, frankly, but there's many others I do like.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so
Maybe,
Alamo.
maybe I'm afraid his suicide is contagious or something.
So Alamo wants to know, how do you consider your life if you have children, and what do you think an artist's practice with children would provide to a career, from understanding curators, collectors, etc.?
I mean, I'm not really that interested in understanding curators and collectors, first of all. I'm interested in them understanding me, but I don't have children of my own. My wife has 2 sons who are 28 and 25, and I love them and I consider them my own also, but I don't think I could ever take the plunge and have children at this point in history, knowing what I know about what the future will bring.
Ooh, I got to follow up on that one.
We have 4 minutes.
There's a wonderful podcast about climate change called Outrage and Optimism. And it's kind of about both those things. So we kind of need both, right? I look into the future and, like you, I'm really, concerned about climate change in particular. What gives you reason to be hopeful, if anything?
About what?
The future.
I'm not really hopeful. I think it's going to be hard.
Mm.
And things that we care about are going to be under a lot of stress.
Yeah.
So anyway, not to be a bummer, but can't lie.
Yeah. Okay, we have time maybe for one quick question from the.
One more upper.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me frame that in that I love what I do so much. I'm hopeful about every day and I get out of bed jumping for joy and I can't wait to get to the studio, but that's not the future.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think about, I'm going to say that human creativity is miraculous. And
It is, but I hope there's enough.
the earth will be fine with or without us. And it'll be interesting to see if we can somehow pull off a miracle as we run headlong over the cliff.
I wouldn't bet on it. Anyway, next question.
Yeah, so can you, has there been any particular project, this is from Gregory, that you felt made the biggest impact on the planet for the better?
Probably Manifest Destiny, but what good did it do? Nothing.
Do you think art has the potential to make a positive impact?
Not really. I mean,
Preaching to the choir?
seriously, the problem is the time frame that we have, the window is so closed that, I mean, if we had like 200 years to figure this shit out, no problem. I think we get it together.
Mm-hmm. Angie wants to know if you can speak a little bit more in the 1 minute remaining about the influence of cinema, especially fantasy movies and filmmakers on your career and the imagery you use. Tip it.
I mean, I grew up immersed in that, like as a kid, and I went to 3 movies a day sometimes, and became friendly with many of my heroes that worked on some of my favorite movies. So I've just been, I consider that hand in hand, certainly with art history.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Alexis. It's been great having you.
Thank you for the great questions.
Alexis is going to be into studio visits at some point, so many of you will get a chance to get together with him in person. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you.